The knock at Daniel Hayes' door was the kind that carried authority. It wasn't the casual tap of a neighbor coming by to borrow a tool, nor the friendly rap of a delivery driver dropping off a package. It was sharp, steady, and deliberate. The sort of knock that belonged to someone who believed they were owed attention, and they were prepared to stand there until they got it. Daniel dried his hands on a dish towel, already knowing who it was before he even looked through the peephole. The HOA board. He had been expecting them ever since he'd closed his front gate for good the week prior. Through the narrow glass, he saw them lined up like they were on paradic three figures in pressed shirts, clipboards tucked tight against their chests. At the front was Margaret Pierce, the HO president, a woman who could freeze you with a glance even in July heat. To her left was Harold, the vice president, who looked more like a frustrated accountant than a neighbor, his glasses forever sliding down his nose. And rounding out the trio was Carla, a recent transplant to the community who, Daniel suspected, had joined the board because she liked telling people what they could and couldn't do. He opened the door slowly, leaning against the frame. "Morning," he said evenly. Margaret wasted no time with pleasantries. "Monsieur Hayes, we're here regarding your gate. You know the one." "I'm familiar with it," Daniel replied, folding his arms. "It needs to be unlocked," she said, voice clipped, as though she were announcing the time of day. "As of last week, you've been in violation of community accessibility standards. This has been noted in our records." Daniel glanced over his shoulder at the gate in question, a tall, black iron structure that stood at the end of his driveway. He'd had it installed 2 years ago for privacy. It didn't block the road. It didn't prevent anyone from getting to their own homes. It simply kept strangers from wandering onto his land. "And what standard exactly am I violating?" he asked. Harold stepped forward, flipping through his clipboard until he found the page he wanted. Section 4B. It states clearly that residents cannot erect barriers that restrict access to community areas. Several of your neighbors have raised concerns. They feel the gate sets a precedent, one that could lead to division. Division, Daniel repeated, tasting the word. "It's my driveway. My property. I pay for the upkeep. How exactly does keeping it private divide anyone?" Carla piped up, eager to prove her usefulness. "People walk through here sometimes. Kids ride bikes. We all share this neighborhood, Mr. Hayes. That's what makes it a community. Your gate sends the wrong message." Daniel tilted his head. "And what message is that?" "That you think you're above everyone else," she said quickly, then caught Margaret's sharp glance and shut her mouth. Margaret smoothed her expression and folded her hands. "The point is simple, Mr. Hayes. You must keep the gate open. Unlocked at all times. It's in the best interest of the neighborhood." Daniel let the words hang in the air for a moment. He could feel their confidence pressing on him like a weight. These were people used to winning small battles, used to residents caving in after the first threat of fines or legal action. "You're saying," he began slowly, "that I should just open up my property for anyone who feels like using it? Neighbors, delivery trucks, the spirit doesn't matter who. That's the spirit of community," Harold said, nodding. "We trust each other here. And frankly, your refusal to comply makes things difficult for everyone. We can't make exception. So the rule is my land is everybody's land. But everybody else's land is just theirs." Carla shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Margaret's smile was tight, polite, and cold. "If it's non-negotiable, we'll begin issuing daily fines starting next week if you refuse. It's better to cooperate now rather than escalate this unnecessarily." Daniel studied the three of them. They were so sure of themselves, standing in perfect formation, like a firing squad of paperwork and bylaws. He thought of all the times he'd seen them patrol the neighborhood, measuring mailbox posts or scolding kids for leaving basketball hoops at the curb. He thought of the letters they mailed out, signed in black ink at the bottom like royal decrees. "Let me ask you something," he said finally. "How many of you have actually set foot on my driveway?" They blinked at him. "Other than right now," he added. No one answered. "That's what I thought," Daniel said. He stepped back and began closing the door. "You want my gate open? Go ahead and find me. We'll see where it goes from there." Margaret's voice sharpened. "Mr. Hayes, you're making a mistake," with a solid thud, cutting her off mid-sentence. Inside, Daniel stood still for a moment, listening to their muffled voices outside, their tones clipped with indignation. He could picture them scribbling notes on their clipboards, already preparing the violation notice that would arrive in his mailbox within days. He imagined them marching back down his driveway, whispering to one another about how difficult he was, how stubborn. But what they didn't know, what not a single one of them had bothered to check, was that the land his gate stood on wasn't just his driveway. The road itself, the stretch of cracked asphalt that wound from the county highway through their subdivision, had a complicated history. A history the HOA had never cared to research. Daniel had. The morning the sign went up, the neighborhood buzzed like a hive poked with a stick. Cars slowed at the end of the subdivision road, brake lights glowing red as drivers leaned out their windows in confusion. At the mouth of the road, where the faded county sign once stood, a new one gleamed in bold black letters par near DAAS. Below the sign was a gate, heavy iron like the one at Daniel's own driveway, only larger and reinforced. It stretched across the entire width of the road, anchored into fresh concrete. A lock, thick and industrial, gleamed in the sunlight. By 8 o'clock, a small crowd had gathered. Residents stepped out of their cars, muttering to one another. Mothers with children in the back seat, retirees on their way to morning coffee groups, a few people still in work uniforms, all of them stuck, all of them staring. When Daniel's pickup rolled into view, the murmurs grew into a low roar. He parked deliberately, unhurried, and climbed out. He carried a thick envelope tucked under his arm. Margaret Pierce, the HOA president, was already there. She stood rigid at the front of the group, lips pressed into a hard line, clipboard clutched like a shield. She marched forward as Daniel approached. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the noise. Daniel looked at the gate, then at her. "Looks like a gate," he said evenly. "Of same kind you asked me to unlock. This isn't funny," Margaret snapped. "You've blocked the only entrance to this community. Do you realize the chaos you're causing?" Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. He held them high so everyone could see. "This," he said, "is the deed. As of last week, I am the legal owner of this road. From the county highway all the way through to the cul-de-sac. Every inch of it." The crowd rippled with disbelief. Someone shouted, "That's impossible. Another road." But Daniel was ready. He unfolded the top sheet, displaying the county seal. Turns out the subdivision developer went bankrupt years ago before transferring the road to the county. It stayed in limbo. The county put it up for auction, probably assuming no one would bother. But I bothered. I bought it fair and square. Paid cash. A hush fell over the group as his words sank in. Margaret's face drained of color. "That can't be legal," she hissed. "Ah, it's legal," Daniel said calmly. "I checked with the clerk's office myself, had an attorney review the paperwork. This road is now my property. Which means egress is no longer free, access is no longer free." Gasps broke out. People turned to one another, whispering in panic. Harold, the vice president, pushed forward, sweat beading on his forehead. You can't just cut us off. We live here. We have jobs, families. We need this road." Daniel's expression softened, though his tone stayed firm. "And I needed privacy on my driveway. Remember when you told me my gate sent the wrong message? That it was non-negotiable. Funny thing is, none of you cared about property rights when it wasn't your property at stake." Carla, standing a little behind the others, tried to recover the board's authority. "You're holding us hostage. This is extortion." Daniel raised a brow. "No, it's ownership. You ordered me to unlock my gate. Now I've closed yours. Permanently. Unless we come to an arrangement." A silence heavier than the summer air followed. Engines idled. Children fidgeted in the back seats. Neighbors stared at him with a mix of shock and fury. Margaret's voice wavered as she tried to regain control. "What kind of arrangement?" Daniel pulled another paper from the envelope, a neatly printed document. "A lease. Reasonable annual fee per household for access rights. Covers maintenance, insurance, and wear on the pavement. Nothing outrageous. Less than what the HO collects for landscaping those flower beds you never water." A murmur swept through the crowd. Some looked relieved. Others looked enraged. "You're profiting off us," Harold accused, his voice rising. Daniel's eyes flicked to him. "No more than the HOA profits off me every year. The difference is I actually own what I'm charging for. You can sign the lease, or..." He nodded toward the gate. "You can find another way in and out. But as far as I can tell, the only other way involves a mile of swamp and a creek." The back muttered, "He's got us." Another groaned, "Unbelievable." Margaret's hands trembled around her clipboard. For the first time in years, she had no command, no rule to cite, no fine to threaten. She was staring at a man who had outplayed her, not with bluster, but with cold paperwork. "You can't expect the entire neighborhood to agree to this," she said weakly. Daniel shrugged. "Don't need the entire neighborhood. Just the ones who want to keep using the road. My gate will stay locked until then." The tension crackled like a storm about to break. Neighbors exchanged glances. They're calculating what this would mean for their commutes, their daily lives. Daniel watched her rage to resignation. He knew it wouldn't take long. Finally, an older resident at the edge of the crowd spoke up. "What's the fee?" Daniel named a number, not ruinous, but not cheap either, enough famous to remind them that nothing, not even roads, came free forever. A groan passed through the group. Margaret looked like she might explode, but the man nodded slowly. "I'll pay it." Better than being stuck, and just like that, the dam cracked. A few others muttered agreement. Some grumbled but admitted they had no choice. The crowd began to shift, the weight of practicality overcoming their indignation. Daniel tucked the papers back into the envelope, calm as ever. I'll leave copies with you all. Review them, sign if you're interested. Until then, the road stays closed. You can thank your HOA for teaching me the value of gates. A turned, unlocked the heavy padlock, and pulled the gate open just enough to drive his truck through. The residents surged toward the gap, cars inching forward nervously, as though afraid the opening might vanish before they got through. Margaret stood frozen, Clifford hanging limp at her side. For the first time since Daniel had moved into the neighborhood, she looked small, defeated. As he drove away, Daniel glanced in his rearview mirror. The sign gleamed in the sun PIVT Werwinds. The board had ordered him to unlock his gate. Instead, he had locked theirs. And now, for the first time in years, the balance of power in the neighborhood had shifted. Not with shouting or threats, but with the simple stroke of a pen and the clang of a closing lock.